Hi, Grandma here, and I'm reading Ben and Me by Robert Lawson. Looking at this picture, wonder who Ben is and who me is. Well, if we read the front cover, it says, An Astonishing Life of Benjamin Franklin by his good mouse, Amos. So now let's look at the picture again. So it's about Benjamin Franklin and his mouse, Amos. And we're going to preview this book first. So we're going to look at a lot of the pictures. That looks like a picture of a woman, but I think it's supposed to be Ben Franklin. And then there's his mouse sitting on some cheese with a quill in his hand, as if he is a writer. Well, that would be interesting, wouldn't it, to read a book written by a mouse. And then we look here at the table of contents, and I see that this is going to be something of a history book, because it says one chapter is We Invented Franklin's Stove, another one is Electricity, another one we do some printing, another the Battle of Versailles. And I know enough about Benjamin Franklin to know that those are all important details in Benjamin Franklin's life. Then if we look at the back of the book, we have a summary. Ever wonder where inventors get their ideas? And it turns out the great inventor Benjamin Franklin got his best ideas from a mouse named Amos. Now, do you really think that is true? It's not true. So now I know that this is going to be what they call an animal fantasy. It's going to be historical fiction, so we're going to learn about Benjamin Franklin, but because an animal is telling the story, it's called animal fantasy. Another word that Amos is anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism means when an animal has human-like qualities. We saw him holding his quill, and we found out that this is written by the mouse, and that he has given Benjamin Franklin great ideas. Now, for those of you who are interested in how words are formed, anthro means human, and we have it in the word anthropology, which is the study of humans. Then morphism means shape. Sometimes we say something morphed into something else, meaning it changed shapes. But in this case, it means the qualities. So human qualities for an animal is what this is going to be about. But reading on. Funny, interesting, and wise, this classic tale has been a favorite for generations. Once you've met Amos and read his accounts, you'll never think of Ben Franklin in American history quite the same way. Now, one of the things I like about this book is it does have a map, and I love any book that has a map. It helps me follow the journey of the person it's about. But it also has bits of wisdom from Poor Richard's Almanac. And these are things that Benjamin Franklin said, like early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Things that are famous. And it's nice to know that they come from Benjamin Franklin. Then we also have something which is really great in the back of the book, Ben Franklin's life. And this is called a timeline, even though it's not really on a line. It's the chronology, which is another word for time, of Benjamin Franklin's life. So you can refer back to that if you've got a copy of the book. The final thing that I'm really happy about, having just read a book that had a lot of words that we didn't understand, is this, which is like a little dictionary for words. Andirons, anvil, bosun, courtier, core, fife, foppish, gout, maxim, milliner, orate. Oh, here's a good one, popinjay. Rapscallion is another good word. Stalwart, tankard, trousseau, uncouth, and vestry. So when we run into those words, we know that there's a little dictionary in the back that's going to give us the definitions. All right. There's also a foreword in the book, but I actually like reading forewords at the end of the book because it gives the author, it doesn't tell enough about the story to help in the previewing process, but it tells about a little bit more about the author, and I'm usually a little more interested about the author at the end of the book. So chapter 1 is called I, Amos, and there's the picture of Amos sitting in a chair like a human with a quill in his hand, getting ready to write. Since the recent death of my lamented friend and patron, Ben Franklin, many so-called historians have attempted to write accounts of his life and his achievements. Most of these are wrong in so many respects that I feel the time has come for me to take pen and paw and set things right. All of these ill-informed scribblers seem astonished at Ben's great fund of information, at his brilliant decisions, at his seemingly knowledge of all that went on about him. Had they asked me, I would have told them it was me. For many years, I was his closest friend and advisor, and if I do say it, it was in great part responsible for his success and fame. Not that I wish to claim too much, I simply hope to see justice done, credit given where credit is due, and that's to me, mostly. Ben was undoubtedly a splendid fellow, a great man, a patriot and all that, but he was undeniably stupid at times, and had it not been for me, well, here's the true story and you can judge for yourself. I was the oldest of 26 children. Remember, he's a mouse. My parents, in naming us, went right through the alphabet. I, being first, was Amos. The others that came along, though, Bathsheba, Claude, Daniel, and so forth down to the babies, Xenophon, Isabel, and Zenas. We lived in the vestry of the old Christ Church on 2nd Street in Philadelphia, behind the paneling. With that number of mouths to feed, we were naturally not a very prosperous family. In fact, we were really quite poor as church mice, which also is kind of a famous saying, and I don't know if it comes from Ben Franklin, but poor as church mice indicates somebody's very poor. But it was not until the hard winter of 1745 that things really became desperate. That was a winter long to be remembered for its severity, and night after night my poor father would come in tired and wet with his little sack practically empty. We were driven to eating prayer books, and when those gave out, we took to the minister's sermons. That was for me the final straw. The prayer books were tough, but those sermons, whew! Being the oldest, it seemed fitting that I should go out into the world and make my own way. Perhaps I could in some way help the others. At least it left one less to be provided for. So, saying farewell to all of them, my mother and father and all the children from Bathsheba to Zenas, I set forth on the coldest, windiest night of a cold and windy winter. Little did I dream at that moment of all the strange people and experiences I should encounter before ever I returned to that little vestry home. All I thought of were my cold paws, my empty stomach, and those sermons. Okay, now I saw the word vestry. Was that one of the words in our dictionary? Let me look back and see. No. Vestry. Yes, there it is on page 119. A room connected to a church used for meetings or classes. Okay, reading on. I have never known how far I traveled that night, for what with the cold and hunger, I must have become slightly delirious. The first thing I remember clearly was being in a kitchen and smelling cheese. It didn't take long to find it. It was only a bit of rind and fairly dry, but how I ate. Refreshed by this, my first real meal in many a day, I began to explore the house. It was painfully bare, clean, but bare. Very little furniture. And That all hard and shiny, no soft things or dusty corners where a chap could curl up and have a good warm nap. It was cold too, almost as cold as outdoors. Upstairs were 2 rooms. One was dark, and from it came the sound of snoring. The other had a light and the sound of sneezing. I chose the sneezy one. We'll have a picture of him choosing the sneezy one. In a large chair close to the fireplace sat a short, thick, round-faced man trying to write by the light of a candle. Every few moments he would sneeze and his square-rimmed glasses would fly off. Reaching for these, he would drop his pen. By the time he found that and got settled to write, the candle would flicker from the draft. When that calmed down, the sneezing would start again, and so it went. He was not accomplishing much in the way of writing. Of course, I recognized him. Everyone in Philadelphia knew the great Dr. Benjamin Franklin, scientist, inventor, printer, editor, author, soldier, statesman, and philosopher. He didn't look great or famous that night, though he just looked cold and a bit silly. He was wrapped in a sort of dressing gown with a dirty fur collar, and on his head was perched an odd-looking fur cap. The cap interested me, for I was still chilled to the bone, and this room was just as bleak as the rest of the house. It was a rather disreputable-looking affair, that cap, but in one side of it I'd spied a hole, just my size. You don't suppose that's where he lives, is in Benjamin Franklin's cap? Up the back of the chair I went, and under cover of the next fit of sneezes, in I slid. What a cozy place that was. Plenty of room to move about a bit. Just enough air, such soft fur, and such warmth. Here, said I to myself, is my home. No more cold streets or cellars or vestries. Here I stay. At the moment, of course, I never realized how true this was to prove. All I realized was that I was warm, well-fed, and oh so sleepy, and so to bed. Chapter 2, we invent the Franklin stove. And here we have a picture of a lot of mice around something that looks to be on fire. I slept late the next morning. When I woke, my fur cap home was hanging on the bedpost, and I in it. Dr. Franklin was again crouched over the fire, attempting to write between fits of sneezing and glasses hunting. The fire, what there was of it, was smoking, and the room was as cold as ever. Not wishing to be critical, I said, but perhaps a bit of wood on that smoky ember that you seem to consider a fire might. Waste not, want not, said he, severe, and went on writing. Well, just suppose, I said, just suppose you spent 2 or 3 weeks in bed with pneumonia. Would that be a waste, or? It would be, said he, putting on a log, whatever your name might be. Amos, said I, and then there'd be doctor's bills. Bills, he said, shuddering, and put on 2 more logs quick. The fire blazed up then, and the room became a little better, but not much. Dr. Franklin, I said, that fireplace is all wrong. You might call me Ben, just plain Ben, said he. What's wrong with it? Well, for one thing, most of the heat goes up the chimney, and for another, you can't get around it. Now, outside our church, there used to be a hot chestnut man. Sometimes when business was rushing, he'd drop a chestnut. Pop was always on the lookout, and almost before it touched the ground, he'd have it in his sack and down to the vestry with it. Then he'd put it in the middle of the floor, and we'd all gather around for warmth. 28 of us would heat, and the room as well. It was all because it was out in the open, not stuck in a hole in the wall like that fireplace. Amos, he interrupts, excited. There's an idea there, but we couldn't move the fire out into the middle of the room. Well, we could if there was something to put it in, iron or something. But the smoke, he objected. Pipe, said I, curled up for another nap. I didn't get it, though. Ben rushed off downstairs, came back with a great armful of junk, dumped it on the floor, and was off for more. No one could have slept, not even a dormouse. After a few trips, he had a big pile of things there. There were scraps of iron, tin, and wire. There were a couple of old warming pans, an iron oven, 3 flat irons, 6 pot lids, a wire bird cage, and an anvil. Now, if you want to know what an anvil is, you can look at the back of the book. But it's something that is used to beat hot metal into different shapes. There were saws, hammers, pincers, files, drills, nails, screws, bolts, bricks, sand, and an old broken sword. He drew out a sort of plan and went to work. With the clatter he made, there was no chance of a nap. So I helped all I could, picking up the nuts and screws and tools that he dropped, and his glasses. Ben was a fair terror for work. Once he was interested, it was almost noon before he stopped for a bit of rest. We looked over what had been done, and it didn't look so bad, considering. It was shaped much like a small fireplace set up on legs, with 2 iron doors on the front and a smoking pipe running from the back to the fireplace. He'd taken the andirons out of the fireplace and boarded that up so we wouldn't lose any heat up the chimney. Ben walked around looking at it, proud as could be, but worried. "The floor," he said. "It's the floor that troubles me, Amos. With those short legs and that thin iron bottom, the heat." "Well, down in the docks," said I, "we used to hear the shipwrights telling how the soldiers built their cooking fires on board ship. A layer of sand right on the deck, bricks on top of that, and—" "Amos!" he shouted, "you've got it!" and rushed for the bricks and sand. He put a layer of sand in the bottom of the affair, the bricks on top of that, and then set the andirons in. It looks promising. "Eureka!" he exclaimed, stepping back to admire it and tripping over the saw. "Straighten things up a bit, Amos, while I run and get some logs." "Don't try to run," I said. "And by the way, do you come through the pantry on the way up?" "Why?" he asked. "In some ways, Ben," I said, "you're fairly bright, but others you're just plain dull. The joy of creating may be meat and drink to you, but as far as me, a bit of cheese." He was gone before I finished, but when he came back with the logs, he did have a fine slab of cheese, a loaf of rye bread, and a good big tankard of ale. So we're going to see a picture of what the Franklin stove looked like. Can you see it sitting on the irons? This is before there were electric irons. You used to have to put them by heat. Interesting. We put in some kindling and logs and lit her up. She drew fine, and Ben was so proud and excited that I had to be rather sharp with him before he would settle down to food. Even then, he was up every minute to admire it from a new angle. Before we finished even one sandwich, the room had warmed up like a summer afternoon. "Amos," said he, "we've done it." "Thanks for the we," I said. "I'll remember it." So that's the end of chapter 1 and chapter 2, and I'm going to stop here. Maybe some of you even have a Franklin stove in your house that helps heat in the winter time. So now we know who to thank. Amos and Ben. Bye-bye.